In 2008, when fuel prices were high for about 3 years, I was thriving from a business that sold system that could be installed on a motor vehicle and increase the fuel mileage by 10 to 20% with the equipment alone, and up to 50% by applying driving tips in the owner's manual. By 2008, the economy was overheated and was about to collapse. I was not aware of that fact. I was too busy running the business. God was blessing me after putting me through some severe financial trials that brought me through 19 bank mortgage foreclosures and a Chapter 11 bankruptcy all at the same time. Everything I owned was at risk and was about to be lost, so I turned back to teaching, which I had done for 20 years for free at 3 Christian schools. To support myself, I had to upgrade my education and get certified to teach in the public school, which paid enough to live on. I already held a PhD in Bible and aviation, so it only took me 1 year to get my teaching certificate in 2 states, Vermont and New York, for math, general science, chemistry, and physics. I got a job 85 miles away from home, and it lasted 1 semester before I was fired for standing for truth in a corrupt education system that was indoctrinating the students in error. This is a story for another day. 8 years after being fired from that only steady job I ever had, except for the 4 years I was in the U.S. Air Force as a fighter pilot at the end of the Vietnam War, God blessed me in the business that I built over those 8 years, which finally got profitable in the last 3 years. So back to the beginning of the story. 2008, and my business was still thriving just before the Great Recession. I had a crew from Cable News Network, CNN, visit my business, and we're going to do a story on how people might be able to deal with those high fuel prices at that time. When I started the business, the gasoline was $1.50 a gallon. By 2008, it was $4.30 a gallon. The week CNN spent at my business was very nerve-wracking. They wanted me to install a system on their vehicle and test it out with them witnessing to verify the results. Mechanically, everything went wrong that week. Between their vehicle having the hardest engine to work on, to not having the exact tools I needed, to breaking things and smashing my knuckles and losing things in the dirt, to not being able to buy the parts I needed to finish the job, I finally got the job done by the end of the week. Then the boss at CNN told us we couldn't test the system because it wasn't federally approved. We went around and around on that discussion, and we finally got permission to test it out. By then, after all the trials and opposition during the week, I was emotionally and physically drained. Of course, all through that week, I was praying for deliverance from this extreme pressure I was under to perform. Finally, the hour came for the test at the end of the week. At the last hour of the last work day for them, we actually had a test result that was better than normal, and it took me a while to figure out why. But that's not the point I'm trying to get to in this story. The test was designed by CNN. Even though we had equipment installed on the vehicle that told me the exact mileage per gallon the vehicle was achieving by the second, and as well as by the trip, by the day, or by the tank full. They wanted to do a test where we fill the tank to the first click of the gas station filler nozzle, hose nozzle, and then drive 100 miles and fill the tank back up. and then do the same thing with the system turned on. During 100 miles, or dividing 100 miles by the number of gallons it took to fill the tank would give us the miles per gallon that we achieved. We had just enough time to drive these two 100-mile tests before sunset, so everything had to go right to get it done in time for them to leave. Considering everything that went wrong all week, I expected something to go wrong again and make the whole week a total flop. So as I was doing all week, I prayed that God would bring this week to a successful end with a result that would glorify Him. At the end of the second 100-mile trip, I pulled the car into the Hess station to do the final fill-up. As I stepped out of the car, I looked up to the west and at a stunning sunset that had rays of sun radiating through the clouds in the formation of a cross. I knew it was a message from God to me that everything was going to be all right. My trials were over. The test would be successful, and CNN would not be writing a report that my hydrogen boost system was a fraud. I grabbed my camera and took a picture of the sunset and used it as my screensaver on my computer until it died years later. The point of the whole story is that I learned how to get messages from God through signs in the sky. This was the first of the signs in the sky I have interpreted as messages to me from God. I will now tell you about a few more. But while we're still fresh about the week-long test of my patience and faith, let me tell you the conclusion. CNN never aired any story of my hydrogen boost system, and to my knowledge, any other gas mileage enhancement system. The year 2020 was a testing of the whole world of their faith in God. In the U.S., we had already been through 3 years of the fake news media lying about our president, about a schemed up story about Russian collusion in our 2016 election, based on an intelligence dossier paid for by his opponent Hillary Clinton and the Democratic National Committee, and sourced through a British spy and some Russian conspirators. This was true Russian collusion by the Democrats, who were projecting their own crime onto our President Donald Trump. Then later in 2020, the Democrats, I'm sorry, I can't use that term anymore, the demon rats in the House of Representatives impeached the president for a phone call, a perfect phone call made to the newly elected Prime Minister of Ukraine. The Russian collusion hoax failed when Special Counsel Mueller's investigation ended, and the impeachment ended with the Senate acquitting the president. So the demon rats, in collusion with other demons around the world, implemented a plan that was laid out in a war game scenario just a few months before. They had already engineered a virus that they expected to be highly infectious and highly deadly in a lab in Wuhan province in China, with a collaborative effort between American and Chinese scientists. The war game exercise had determined that the best time and place to release a biological weapon to cause a worldwide pandemic would be just before or during the Chinese New Year's celebration in Wuhan province in China. Apparently, there are more Chinese people living in more places around the world, visiting their homes in Wuhan province during their traditional celebration Chinese New Year than any other event or place in the world, making it the best place and time for releasing a bioweapon to cause worldwide panic and death. Of course, the demons could not pass up the chance to further their goal of world domination because they were watching their plans for world government through the United Nations falling apart as President Trump canceled the renegotiated treaties and trade deals throughout the world. Trump was an existential threat to global government, and nationalist movements were inspired throughout the world by Trump's leadership in the USA and in world bodies. So the demons working through corrupt officials and people throughout the world caused the COVID-19 pandemic, and this locked down national economies throughout the world, and people were locked up in their homes for months, and they were mandated to wear masks for many more months. Of course, there was a psychological toll on many populations. Many people committed suicide, and many homes were torn apart by abuse caused by forced confinement of families that barely could get along when they were not confined. I prayed often for God to give me some reassurance I could share with my loved ones. In mid-autumn, we had some strange weather, with many days of rain, with breaking clouds and splashes of sunshine, perfect for rainbows. But most rainbows are usually seen in the evening, when the sun is near setting and rain is falling off to the east. But one day, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I was out taking care of my goats when I looked up and a rainbow was right there over my head and coming down right behind me, or right behind the trees separating my property with my neighbor's property. One end of the rainbow was so close to me that I could throw a stone to where it landed. In fact, one picture shows it landing in my backyard 100 feet away from me. The strangest rainbow I ever saw. And here's the picture. In this next picture, you can see the rainbow right through that little hole in the middle of the tree line, right in the middle of the picture. You can also see it arching off the right side of the trees off to the edge of the picture. The weather was very strange this day. 3 hours later, when you normally see rainbows, you see this picture where the rainbow is coming straight down from the sky, a little bit of an arch, and landing right on a grain silo or a silage silo on a farm across the back field from my house. 2 rainbows in one day, 3 hours apart, and one of them so close to me was very odd weather. Signs in the sky. I interpreted this as another message from God to me. Again, the message was the same. Everything is going to be all right for those that love God. The year 2020 is certainly a year of trials and refining fire for God's people. By the way, although all through the pandemic, don't forget there were fires in the cities, fires in the forest, fires on police vehicles, fires on churches, fires everywhere, all caused by the rioters and deep state pawns. There will be more. God is using these fires as refining fires to refine the saints, to prepare them for the coming end times. We will talk about that in a little while. One more short reference to another sign from God that everything will be all right. One morning during the pandemic, I stepped out onto my deck and looked up into a very clear, deep blue sky. It was in the morning. Since 1990, I have been complaining about all the chemtrails that we have been bombarded with. I have prayed that God would put a stop to this geoengineering practice that has been destroying our planet and our habitat. I was sick of not seeing a clear sky. Every day, the sky would be littered with disgusting trails of chemicals being spread over us by airplanes flown by who knows who. I suggested that President Trump, early in his first term, should make a public announcement that someone was attacking us from above with these chemtrails and that he was declaring war on them to protect America. Starting today, any airplane spewing out chemicals would be chased down by fighter jets armed with missiles and guns and shot down. It's a good thing I'm not president. But have you seen the skies lately? At least in my area, 50 miles north of Albany, New York, we have had at least a whole year of no chemtrails in the sky. That morning when I saw the deep blue sky, I saw 2 jetliners with normal contrails barely visible, but clear enough to remind me that God has answered my prayers for clear skies. And I think Trump had something to do with it. And he didn't have to shoot any planes out of the sky. This deep blue clear sky with 2 small contrails was a message to me, again, that everything was going to be all right for those that love God. Wow, 11/11. I just noticed today's date, 11/11. That is a well-noted set of numbers mentioned a few times in the post of QAnon that I have followed since it began in 2017. Something special is supposed to happen on, in, around, or about 11/11. I don't know what year it's supposed to happen, but 11/11 may be a date, or it may be a reference to a file name or something else. But 11/11 is significant for some reason. I didn't even notice this morning when I got my message from the sky that today is 11/11. Maybe the message I received from God is what we are expecting. Let me tell you about it. Early this morning, I went out before dawn to feed the goats and bring them out to pasture. It takes about a half an hour. On my way back into the house, I saw the eastern sky and sunrise. It was unusual, so I ran into the house and grabbed my camera. I ran out to the back deck and started taking pictures. The sunrise reminded me of the sunset mentioned above in the end of the disastrous CNN week 12 years ago. The formation was similar to a cross in the sky that gave me comfort and message that everything was going to be all right back then. So I started taking pictures, and as the sun behind the horizon at the start rose and kept changing the formation of streaks of light and clouds, I kept taking pictures and started to interpret the message I believe God was giving me. The more I received, the more the formation changed and the more the pictures I took. The longer I looked and the more details I noticed. At first, I only saw the formation of the sun rays shooting out like the sunset cross mentioned above. Of course, I interpreted this message to be the same as all my previous messages from God. Everything will be all right. As the scene changed, I noticed the clouds that looked like fire. As I zoomed out to a wider view, I noticed that fire all across the eastern horizon. Fire everywhere. This must be what the western states looked like earlier this year when all the forest fires were raging, all the way from Washington State to Southern California. I believe most of the fires were intentionally set by the pawns of the deep state demons, those agents of death and destruction, like BLM and Antifa. I guess it should be obvious what God was showing me here. This was a reminder of what America was going through in 2020. Remember all the fires I mentioned? fires in the sky, fires in the forest, fires on police vehicles and other vehicles, fires in stores and other businesses, fires in the middle of the streets, fires everywhere. This time of trials and tribulations was used by God as a refining fire to refine the saints, the people of God, the righteous remnant. It was used by the enemy for destruction. Their goal was destruction of America. God used it for good. Was I getting the same message, or was God giving me more? I immediately got more excited. I thought God was playing a movie in front of me, and He was about to give me more messages, and not just the same message I had received 4 times already over the last 12 years, that everything was going to be all right. But that's not what God was telling me. Not just that we had fires this summer, but that the fires are not over yet. We are in the middle of a contentious election, not just for president, but for Congress too. The deep state and Satan himself know that they have lost this election if we keep it fair and legal. And they hate that President Trump is fighting back against their corruption. They are desperate. They are fighting for their lives, political and physical. They want power like they have had for too long and too easy, as they have never seen the Republicans challenge an election like they are right now. Yes, they have seen a challenge in one district or in one state or for one office, but this challenge may include at least 30 states because of the Dominion voting machines that are corrupt with the hammer and scorecard programming. All 30 states may end up getting recounted by hand, questioning every down ballot election in every state. Actually, I believe every election in all 50 states should be counted by hand, carefully, to weed out all the corruption, not done just by the Dominion machines, but all the fake mail-in ballots as well. And it may come to that. After all, God has used His servants, the prophets, to tell us that Trump is being used by God to expose and clean up all the corruption in government, in Hollywood, in education, in the church, in corporations, in society. It may all start with these election challenges. One prophet told us that even California may be a red state if it was a legal and fair election. In 2018, California stole dozens of House of Representatives seats with their ballot harvesting that they quote-unquote legalized in the middle of the night just before the election. Another corrupt election. I looked at the results of the election counting so far this year, and I see 2 uncontested states that really should be looked at: Virginia and New York. Trump was leading Virginia for a while on election evening. New York was supposedly won by Biden with only a 55-43 margin over Trump, with a vote difference of only 850,000 votes. In 2012, Obama won New York 63 to 35% over Romney, with a vote difference of over 2 million votes. New York was a blue state for sure. Knowing that there was lots of voter fraud and demon rats all over the country, it is possible that Trump actually won New York State and Virginia and even California. Some prophets say that Trump may have won every single state. God has not told me that. Back to God's message. As I was taking 50 pictures of this sunrise, a cross of sun rays made way to a fire all across the horizon. before the sun even broke above the horizon. But then the sun peeked out in the midst of the firestorm scene, and I was relieved. What happens when you see the sun peeking through the midst of a raging storm, like a hurricane? You have hope. The sun indicates clear weather is coming, and the clouds and the wind of a raging storm will eventually disappear. That's what the sun meant to me at that moment. The firestorm was caused by the powers of darkness, and the sun was peeking through to give light to extinguish the darkness. Even though there was fire everywhere on the horizon, the sun peeking through gave hope. A message I got from the sun rising is that God is shining his light into the darkness of corruption and destruction. He will conquer the darkness and the evil. And that is going on in our world today, and he is using Trump to do it. Yes, I believe Trump will win the election, and in a landslide, once the corrupt votes are thrown out and the corrupt machines are eliminated. I believe many arrests will be made because of the corruption. I am not prophesying this. I am repeating the prophecies from other prophets of God who I believe. I believe that after God uses Trump to drain the swamp, actually, I would call it a cesspool or a dung pit. But after God cleans up the corruption, we will have in America and possibly around the world what some have called a golden age. How long it lasts is up to you, is up to us all. Notice in these images a cross. We are reminded of God's message that everything is going to be all right for those that love God. As the sun continued to rise, my hope got stronger and stronger, and my faith was also strengthened. God's light was extinguishing the darkness of evil and destruction as symbolized by the firestorm in the sky. Everything was going to be all right. When the sun was fully up, the only thing that showed on the picture was the sun and the cross. No firestorm, nothing but peace and hope and trust in God came over me. When God's light is fully come, darkness and powers of darkness will be extinguished, just as this image. The raging firestorm is not even distinguishable, as the light of God's truth extinguishes it. This picture confirmed to me that my message from God mentioned above was correct, and that he was indeed giving me more messages as he played this movie in front of me in real time. As I was taking pictures, I knew that just above the sun was a heavy bank of clouds that the sun was about to go behind and be hidden by. What was God going to show me then? I was not concerned or thinking that the sun was going to be figuratively extinguished. I was so excited by what God had already shown me that I couldn't wait for the next part. As I watched the sun started to rise behind the cloud bank, the fires began to return, signifying to me that until Christ returns, we still have trials and tribulations. The coming promised golden age of relative uncorrupt rule in America and possibly elsewhere will never be truly free of temptation and corruption until Christ himself returns to earth. We will still have the struggles and tribulations of normal life, but hopefully not like in 2020. Until the sun is gone, the S-U-N is gone, not just behind the clouds, but gone. The sun, S-O-N, will be here, in our hearts to remind us that everything will be all right for those that love Him. I was also impressed with the limited time the sun was going to be visible before it goes behind the cloud bank today, and that our time of enjoying an uncorrupt government will be limited, followed by another time of relative spiritual darkness and corruption. But our commission does not change. Our job is the same. Our purpose on earth is still to praise God and lead the world to Christ. Prophecy tells us that in the end times there will be a time of great revival coming when many will return to Christ. Will turn to Christ. Soul winning might become easy because of what the world has been through in 2020, or it may become harder. Either way, our commission goes on until Christ returns, even after the spiritual darkness returns to those in power. Will the great revival come during the golden age, signified by the appearance of the sun for a while, or will it come after the corruption has returned, as I will tell you in about a minute? That is up to you, you all, as they say in the South. Are you going to enter the golden age of little or no corruption and go back to your normal self-centered life? Or are you going to use this time of peace and plenty to build the kingdom of God with souls that will prevent or slow the return of corruption and thereby lengthen the golden age for our children and grandchildren? The age will be short if we forget our commission, and it will be long, indefinitely long, if we spend our time of ease to win souls and bring America to the place God intended for it when He appointed our destiny, a city on a hill, to win the world for Christ. We are now facing a second American Revolution, as some call it, or a second American Civil War, as others call it. Either way, we are facing the birth of a nation or the rebirth of a nation. God is giving us a second chance to be what He wants us to be. Will we get it right this time and become the city on a hill that God intended us to be? Or will we be like the ancient Israelites and fall back into apostasy and complacency? God has not shown me which path we will take because it is our free will choice. He is not forcing us onto any path to the future. It is our choice. Whichever way we choose, eventually the corruption will return, as in the 2020 tribulations will test us again. The testing of our faith refines us. In 2020, many lost their businesses in the poor sections of the burned and looted cities. Their families have had to have faith in God to get them through this pandemic with broken dreams and little or no money. Some died from the pandemic, leaving family members and loved ones behind who also trusted in God for their survival and encouragement. The refining fire was working. These survivors have been refined by the fires of trials and tribulation. God will use them in the coming uprising of the left-wing pawns of Satan to comfort and encourage the rest of us when tribulations break our hearts and spirits. God will use them to evangelize the lost who have no hope, turning them to God and His Son Jesus. Many will be saved from eternal death when all around them seems hopeless, and one of the refined saints shows them that the only hope is in the gospel of Jesus Christ. Their broken hearts and hopeless attitudes will be turned into victorious boldness for Christ, especially young people who will get on fire for God and turn many to Jesus. Satan's destruction will be devastating, but the greater the horror of his attacks, the greater the glory of God, and the greater the revival and salvation of lost souls. It will be a war like no other. Satan versus God, demons versus saints, dark versus light, destruction versus evangelism, death versus eternal life. The more who die, the more who will get saved. The more Satan destroys, the more God wins. Just like in many wars in history, when more people were saved in foxholes than in churches, the same will happen during the Great Revival, during the insurrection. Just like President Trump says about winning, winning, winning. We will be winning, winning, winning. Winning souls for the kingdom of God. As I continued taking pictures, I watched the heavenly firestorm beside me begin to subside. I wondered what God was going to show me next. I widened the zoom of my camera and noticed 3 deer had come out onto the field in front of me. The firestorm was not as intense, but still burning. What was God telling me? Life goes on. There in front of me was life. To me, those 3 deer in the distance represented people who still needed the gospel. Our commission may have been somewhat ignored during the pandemic and firestorms, but we still had a job to do. People still need Christ, and we still need to show them the way of salvation. Now quit fretting and get to work. You can give the gospel as I have throughout the pandemic without violating social distancing. If your phone is anything like mine, it rings many times a day. It may have a telemarketer on the other end, but they need Christ too. I have led many telemarketers to faith in Jesus over the years. They call you, but if they want you to listen to them, they have to listen to you, or you can hang up. You don't need to reach way out to those deer in the far field, all of those souls on the mission field, when you have people right here in your own life that are not saved yet. In fact, that was God's next message that he showed me next. As I widened the camera zoom even further, there was the next message. The deer in the far field are still there, but moving to the right and behind the trees. As the 3 goats in the pen in front of me are not going anywhere. What does that mean to you? By the time you get to the deer, they'll be gone. By the time you get prepared to go to the mission field, many will be gone to eternal death. Right in front of you are people in your own community, like goats in a pen, are not going anywhere. And they still need the gospel. And your job is still to give it to them. If you want spiritual darkness to be removed from our land, shine your light by giving the gospel to those in need. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Matthew chapter 5. Then go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Matthew 16. The spiritual darkness we see manifesting in America today is here because the church has failed its mission to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Now it is up to the remnant. If you love God, get to work